Excited to announce our next guest. On paper, she's an award-winning ESPN senior correspondent and columnist for The Undefeated. In life, she is much more. A woman who mixes politics and social commentary with football and basketball. A woman who is suspended from her job after tweeting that President Trump was a white supremacist. You'll have a chance to ask your own questions at the end, but for now, please join us in warmly welcoming to OZY Fest 2018, Jemele Hill. Welcome, Jemele.
Hello, hello.
It's fantastic to have you here.
Thank you.
This crowd will know you for your sports insight, your background, and your political interventions, which are both things we'll get to later in more detail. But I wanted to kick off with, you're writing a memoir at the moment, which will take us right back to the beginning, to Jemele when she was a kid, to Jemele when she was a teenager, your upbringing in Detroit, and your parents, who were both drug addicts. And you're going to talk quite in detail about that, and personally in your book. Tell us about that time.
Yeah, I am currently crafting the proposal, but kind of the layout of the book is basically explaining who I am through the two women who had the most influential impact on my life, which would be my mother and my grandmother who's no longer living. And so there's a lot of truths I have not revealed to a lot of people about my backstory. As you mentioned, I've certainly talked about my parents both being addicted to drugs at different times, and you know, both clean now. I've been clean for many, many years, and I couldn't be even more proud of both of them for not only overcoming drug use, but my mother in particular, who is this close to getting her master's degree in public health administration.
At the age of 61, right?
61 years old, so way smarter than me, that's for sure. So just to talk about their struggles, the impact that had on my life, and, you know, even my grandmother, who was in you know, a lot of abusive relationships, my mother, who was in a lot of abusive relationships, and with her being a rape survivor and having to cope with, you know, the problem of being an addict for a good portion of my childhood and of her life, it will hopefully explain to people why if the worst thing that ever happens to me is that the president attacks me on Twitter, okay, so what? You know, because I've seen way worse than that.
Tell us about the first time that you saw crack cocaine.
Well, as a story I relate to you, like, you know, of course, people have seen a lot of movies, you know, Scarface, New Jack City, all those kind of things. But the first time I saw crack, my mother showed it to me. And she showed it to me and told me, don't ever do it. She wanted me to know what it looked like, and then she did it. She didn't do it in front of me, but she did it later on. And so, you know, just seeing her go through that struggle, that's why I said that, wow, this is... Kudos to you guys for sticking this out.
Look at this guy over here. He's loving the rain.
Yeah,
look at that.
That's right. Embrace it. Thank you. I appreciate that. But no, I mean, I think it's a common struggle a lot of people can relate to when you see your parents go through something. We think of them as superheroes, but sometimes they go through things that are kind of beyond their control. So to witness her go through that, come out on the other end of it, that's why, to me, I mean, she's the most inspirational person I've ever been around.
And do you think this makes you well placed to go beyond sport in the things that you talk about, the things you address, the things you talk to your Instagram and Twitter followers about?
It is. You know, I grew up poor, and I grew up poor, and definitely seeing people go through abuse, that's one end of it. Growing up in the inner city in Detroit, that's another end. So as impressive as the package may look like right now, it wasn't always that way. And I certainly can identify with people who have had to overcome similar obstacles and understanding intricately.
Suspended for urging your followers to boycott advertisers of Dallas Cowboys owner Jerry Jones after he threatened any player who knelt down during the national anthem. Do you have any regrets?
Not a single letter. Shout out to people who get that reference from We're the Millers. No regrets, not even a single letter. No, look, I'm not a person who generally believes in regrets. I'm a person that believes that everything happens for a reason, and what's for you is for you. And while it did break my heart that my co-host in particular, Michael Smith, what he had to go to as a result of an action he didn't take, and he was super supportive throughout it, but kind of the shadow that it cast over our show was difficult, and it in some respects undermined the type of show and the work that we were trying to do at ESPN. So for that, that's the part that still to this day doesn't sit well for me. In terms of everything else, it just kind of is what it is. And I think the one thing that I appreciate about being at ESPN, I've been there 12 years, they understood that at this time that a lot of people, especially if you're a woman of color, a person of color, a LGBTQ member, that we are feeling particularly vulnerable with the tone being set in our nation right now. And so some days, as much as I would like to tell you guys, you know, who won Golden State's latest game, or tell you about why Jacksonville can win a Super Bowl, some days I just didn't give a shit because of everything else that was happening in this country. And so on that particular day, I was caught in a moment where sort of that frustration boiled over in a place where frustrations often boil over, which is Twitter.
Twitter.
Yeah.
Is that a good medium for this, do you think? Is it the right one?
No. Twitter's a terrible medium for that, because there was a more nuanced point I wanted to make, but obviously that people jumped on the trigger words, and I understand that. That's just that's what, well, at that time it was 140 characters, now it's like 700 characters or whatever, but Twitter is built for short, quick thoughts, but it's impossible to have a nuanced conversation, especially about race and white supremacy on Twitter. You just can't do that. And so if anything, I wish if I could sort of redo is that given everything that was happening, I think there would have been space for me somewhere at ESPN to kind of get out more layered thoughts to explain why so many people in this country are feeling vulnerable and under attack.
Do you ever try and use inside influence to have an impact, like, you know, off Twitter, offline?
All the time, because I think, especially if you're in corporate America, look, a lot of conversations that you have about diversity, about tolerance, intolerance, they happen behind closed doors. And there is this expectation when you're in media, they almost want you to call out your company publicly because they're used to them being covered, you know, almost like, the third wall or whatever, the fourth wall. So, but the issues that have happened inside of ESPN, some areas of concern I have had the ability and the comfort to be able to take it to them and say, hey, this is an issue that we need to, you know, address. I mean, like, it wasn't maybe a couple years ago, like, one of the things that bothered me, and it was an issue that certainly ESPN was aware of, was the lack of diversity that we had in our producer ranks.
Right.
It was bad. I mean, frankly. And when we did the 6 p.m. Sports Center, we may have been the show with probably the most producers of color of probably any show. And that's because, one, they were good, and B, that was important for us. And so I just had some conversations with people at ESPN to figure out, why is it that we bring in plenty of people of color, women, as production assistants, and something happens where they're not rising to being a show level producer? And so, you know, we had a lot of conversations and dialogue, but that's how I choose to maybe privately use my influence, or when various media outlets call me and they want to know, they're looking for a person of color for a particular job, or they just want more candidates of color, period. I have no problem giving them names or steering people in certain directions, being a connector and an influencer, because the face of media is still largely white, is still largely male, and the reason certain more complicated topics are covered the way that they are is because of what the media looks like. The reason, for example, this national anthem conversation seems to be spinning in circles is look who's covering the conversation. And there's a lack of understanding there. If I read one more headline that says players protesting the national anthem, I'm going to lose my mind. They're not protesting the national anthem. You know, they're protesting racial injustice in this country during the national anthem, which is a big difference.
That's powerful. And the use of those language, that words makes a difference, right?
It does. I mean, it's kind of, you know, just journalistically where we are, where we're saying things are misheard, misremembered, as opposed to just calling them what they are, which is outright lies. Like that. If as journalists we lose the ability to call a lie, we need to all quit.
What would you say to the person who, on a rainy Sunday afternoon, say,
like
much like now, wants to sit in front of the TV, watch some sport, and does not want to involve themselves with politics, with life? They want to use that as respite from all the stuff that's happening around. Like, how does that person get that respite?
Well, I'm just going to assume they just started watching TV like 10 minutes ago. And the other thing I would say is that it must be nice. Look, it's many a days I wake up and wish that I could punch a button and say, you know what, today, I'm just not being black today. Today, I'm just not going to be a woman today. I wish I had that luxury. I don't have that luxury. And what people who are in that stick to sports crowd don't understand is that sports has never been about just sports. You know, Jackie Robinson integrated baseball in 1947. That was almost 20 years before the Civil Rights Act was passed. We've seen a lot of times where sports is ahead of the rest of society. We've seen other times where it's behind. Like currently, you have, I believe, one professional athlete among the 5 major pro sports who is out. Just one. Male athlete, that is, excuse me. And so we know that's not the case in regular society, but yet something is happening in sports where there's a silence, a suppression that is encouraging people in the LGBTQ community to stay silent and feel like they can't be who they are. So, you know, from the same people who will say stick to sports will watch hours of coverage about Muhammad Ali. And the difference is really simple, is that it's really easy to say that somebody was right and they're a hero and what they did was brave when it turns out they were right. You know, Muhammad Ali, when he was in the process of defying our U.S. government, not wanting to go to war and questioning why we were at war in Vietnam, people hated him. Now we conveniently remember him, but it took us 20 years and probably when he had Parkinson's disease to fully appreciate the sacrifice that he made. It almost cost him his livelihood. So all the people that criticize Colin Kaepernick now, I wonder, do they think about how they will sound 20 years from now? This is somebody who already has an exhibit in the Smithsonian. If you're telling me that in a league where they have had people who have committed acts of domestic violence, been accused of sexual assault, that those people are welcome in the league, but the guy who simply says, please stop killing unarmed black people is not welcome. That's what you're saying.
To go one step further, we've already got a president who came from a non-political background, nothing whatsoever. Do you think we could get to the point where we have definitely political candidates, congressmen in the Senate who come from a sports background, whether it be sports journalism or sports itself?
Definitely. And in fact, now if I had to pick the athlete, although he's not just an athlete, he's probably one of the biggest entertainers in the world, that I could see being the president in the future, it'd probably be The Rock. And I know that
President Rock has a ring to it.
I could definitely see that happening because he has a lot of elements that bring a lot of different groups together. He comes from an impoverished background. He represents those who kind of have that pull yourself by the bootstraps mentality. He obviously has an ethnic background, being Samoan. You know, he's motivational. I don't know anybody who hates The Rock. You know, I mean,
Anybody hate The Rock?
I was like, nobody hates The Rock. The Rock probably, while we're up here talking, probably starred in 7 movies. Like, nobody works harder in Hollywood than that guy. So, and he's also mysterious because we don't know politically how he really feels about anything, but he has this amazing ability to unify people. The Rock has been to ESPN several times, so I've had an opportunity to meet him. And, you know, we got a lot of different celebrities that come through ESPN, some better than others, but you ask anybody there routinely who is one of the best people to come through ESPN celebrities, and The Rock is always either first or second out of their mouth. Kevin Hart might be the other one, because he possesses this ability that when you're in the room with him, he will know everybody's name in the room, and he will be able to tell you something about them because he asks you about your family. So he's very personable. So he, to me, has all the makings of somebody who, I say this absent knowing politically how he feels about anything, but who could probably be president.
And it sounds like you could have a place on his campaign team. Unless...
Send that check, Brock. I just gave you a glowing endorsement. Nah.
Have you been approached yourself about campaigning, or maybe more than campaigning, standing?
I've been approached about campaigning for sure, which... Look, as long as, and all journalists know this, so this is something not unique to ESPN, but, you know, journalists aren't allowed to campaign, all right? So as much as the people who have asked, I've had tremendous and great respect for, you know, the answer is no. And because inevitably people will attach that to how ESPN feels about issue X or Y. That's just unfortunately where we are. So I've been approached about campaigning. Some have approached and suggested that I run for office. Probably, you know, because of everything going on at my alma mater. I went to Michigan State, and everybody's aware of Larry Nassar and the sexual abuse scandal that happened there. Some have suggested I should run for Board of Trustees at some point for Michigan State. But look, I got skeletons, so...
You can air those skeletons right now. Get them out of the closet.
I mean, you know, I'm not ashamed. So, no, but it's as much as I do consider myself politically engaged, and despite the wide variety of opinions I may have, I just, that's not my calling, you know, or it doesn't feel like my calling right now. And I just doubt it ever would be, despite the fact that I'm a giver, and I do, like many of you here, want to see this country in a better place. But no, politics is not for me. You know, you got to make too many people happy, kiss a little too much ass. Like, that's just not my strong suit.
You could be a non-kiss ass politician.
And you could be a broke one and a non-elected one, probably.
Is sport? You've been doing sports journalism. You've been in love with sports journalism since you were a child. I mean, you interned at the Detroit Free Press at the age of 15. You told me like that's all you ever wanted to do. Yeah. And yet, do you think it's your entire future?
I don't. And it's sort of a realization. And you know, I won't. You know, I'll be candid. I mean, obviously, some of the things that have happened in the last 10, 11 months have played a role in that. But even before any of that stuff happened with Donald Trump, I was feeling, I just wondered to myself, you know, when my contract with ESPN was up in a few years, whether or not I would continue on, not necessarily just at ESPN, but continue on in sports, period. And so lately, especially with me and my college roommate starting a production company last August, it feels very much like this next iteration of my career will be more about me being behind the camera, creating content, writing scripted and unscripted shows and movies than it will be in sports. And while there's a part of me that is excited about what the next 10 to 15 years of my life could look like, of course, it's sad for me. You know, writing is my first love. Sports is my 1A love. It's all I've ever done. I've only had 2 jobs outside of being in sports media. I ran a snack counter for the YMCA, which basically was me giving free food to all my friends. And I delivered phone books in college to earn some extra money for spring break. That was literally the only 2 things I've ever done that didn't have to do with sports journalism. So there's a part of me that feels sad about the possibility, the very real possibility, my connection with it may end sooner than I thought it would, but I'm really excited about the types of stories that I could tell, within the confines of creating content. So it's sort of a bittersweet kind of feeling.
Your contract with ESPN is due up kind of 2020, 2021.
I'm not allowed to say what year, just a few years.
Just at some point.
A few years.
But you think that your calling may come even before that? There's an urgency to kind of doing something new?
That's always a possibility. I think most of us in this business were smart enough to think contract to contract. And at the end of when you complete one, you're like, whoo, thank God I made it through. Not because some people are under duress, but not because you're under any kind of duress. But so much can happen, so many different factors. There's a part of me, I do wonder if that thirst, that itch to wholly jump into content creation, that opportunity to do that will come before this contract is up. I mean, it's certainly, possible, with some of the opportunities that have come my way in the wake of all the controversy. So, as always, I'll just kind of judge everything by gut. I haven't made a bad career decision yet. And I'll know the right opportunity when it comes my way, because it would really have to be something truly, special in order to get me to kind of leave the sweet spot that I'm in now at ESPN.
What do you think your next iteration will be? You talk about content creation, TV production. What might you concentrate on? Well,
I think right now there's a real concentration, still a real need on stories about women of color. So I think that will be a huge focus of what I do. There's some series that me and my production partner are writing currently. There's some people.
That's Kelly Carter, right?
Kelly Carter, who's a senior writer for The Undefeated. Some things that we're working on. We're in the lab, as they say, in the studio, trying to put some bars down, some writing bars. So, yeah, I'm extremely excited about that part. Is that because at the end of the day, both of us are writers. And as a journalist, the one thing it affords you is being able to see and document so many different situations. And so I want to bring a lot of, what I've experienced, what I've seen my friends experience, what others have experienced, to something relatable that people can laugh at and connect with. So that to me is what my next 10 or 15 years are probably going to look like. So it's, even though I may leave sports, I'm not leaving behind writing and creating content, which is something I've always done.
Good luck with it, and I'm sure this crowd would offer you really good luck with whatever you do next. You've got a following. They're sticking with you wherever you go.
Thank you.
Last month, you picked up an award, one in a long string of awards that you've picked up, and it was called the Defiant Award, which I thought was a suitable word, potential. You said something very interesting then, which is you talked about the moniker of the strong black woman, and that this is a powerful moniker, but it's also something that can be a burden, can be a negative thing.
Yeah, it can. It's meant as a compliment, so I understand that. Any woman in here who has been called a strong woman, certainly we've heard women being referred to as strong. The problem with that, and especially in particular for black women, is that the concentration on our strength denies us our vulnerability and our delicacy. And, being strong in the context in which people mean it is about what women are willing to withstand, which is a different kind of strength. Why should we have to withstand anything at all? It's one of, not to get off on a rant here, but I really hate the phrase ride or die chick, because I get what they're trying to say, like somebody who's loyal, who's down for you, but they really are about how much shit can I do to you that you'll still stick around for. That's not a good message. You know what I'm saying?
Just keep trying, keep pushing you till you fall over, right?
Exactly. And so when you say a strong black woman, it's about her ability to withstand and bear things she shouldn't have to withstand anyway. And what happens to a lot of us is that because we buy into it, we believe it, we start thinking we're superhuman, and we're not even aware of how much we're taking. That is often coming at the expense of our own self-worth, at the expense of our own sanity and own well-being. And so I'm here for Black women finding places and spaces and people that allow them to be vulnerable, that allow them to be delicate, and allow them to be protected.
And to cry.
And to cry. That's even more important. Is like, you know, and I would say, honestly, the same of Black men who are raised and conditioned in a society that teaches them they can't be vulnerable either. And, you know, I think for Black women, because we have always had to take the back seat to everything, you know, the fight in our community is about trying to dismantle institutional racism. And as a result of that fight being understandably important and at the forefront is that we have to still deal with sexual violence and misogyny, toxic masculinity. We have to still deal with all those things, but they're never on the agenda because institutional racism is items 1 through 10. And as a result that you talk to Black women who have gone through some unimaginable trauma, and there is no space for them to unleash that trauma or to have that trauma heard. And so when I accepted that Defiance Award, I wanted to send a message specifically to Black women to let them know they are loved, beloved. We save Wakanda. We save the world all the time. And somebody needs to step up and save us.
I don't know if you saw, there was a bit of a spat between Trevor Noah this week and the French ambassador.
I heard a little bit about this.
Yeah, he joked that Africa won the World Cup because you saw those fantastic pictures of France winning and the number of players of African origin. The French are known for many things, maybe not their sense of humour, so they didn't take it too well. You've also won an award in the past for your work for the African diaspora in the US. I wondered how you think we should celebrate sporting excellence, whether it's somebody of African origin, for example, who's American or who's French. How do we celebrate that? Is it one side, the other, both?
I think the point Trevor Noah was trying to make is that, and this is a duality that athletes in this country, especially Black athletes, athletes of color, have to deal with, is they love you as long as they produce for you. As you produce for them, I'm sorry. They love you as long as you produce for them. And it's a conditional relationship. The moment you can't produce, the moment that you cannot generate money, you cannot generate championships, slowly, sometimes quickly, that love disappears. And, you know, it reminds me of the movie Do the Right Thing. I call it in many ways the Sal Pizzeria syndrome, because sometimes you will find people who maybe aren't the most tolerant, but will love a team full of Black athletes or will love a particular Black athlete or whatever. And you wonder, how is it that they can love LeBron James, but yet in other spaces of their life, you know, call the police on Black people for being at Starbucks, right? So you wonder, how does this happen? Well, Sal's Pizzeria, it's the same thing. Spike Lee, when he asked John Turturro why he has so many Black people on the wall, but yet he called Black people the N-word constantly. And he pointed to Magic and the Prince, and it was like, oh, they aren't Black people. It's like, they're not really Black people, meaning as long as you see the Black people who have excelled in pop culture or sports, you see them as the exception. You don't really consider them to be the same as the Black person that's coming your way and you clutch your purse. Those are two different Black people to you.
They're the exception, the ones who...
So when people bring up that certain people are friends with certain other Black people as if that's supposed to be the damning Exhibit A evidence that they can't possibly be racist, I have to laugh, because they don't even understand. They're not seeing that person as Black. They see him maybe as rich, they see him as talented, but definitely not as Black. So I think Trevor Noah, his attempt was to bring attention to the fact that, especially considering all the conversations worldwide, not just in America, being had about immigration and who deserves to be let into this country, I think he wanted to bring attention to the fact that here you have African athletes, some of which have probably faced a level of racism that people have no idea who have come from immigrant families, who have helped your country win, one of the greatest sporting spectacles in the world. But I bet you that if they weren't doing that and they were just walking down the street, you'd look at them a totally different way. So if you can manage to see them the way you manage to see regular black people or regular African people that are in France, the way you see the World Cup team, maybe we might make some progress. So it was a larger message to me that he was trying to send about who is contributing to what, because we don't talk about our hardworking, even in sports, you have people that have come from incredible circumstances to be as successful as they are. And we have a lot of people who don't understand that athletes, yeah, to some degree, they wanted the genetic lottery, but the amount of time, attention, work that it takes to be LeBron James, that's why he's one of the greatest sports stories that's ever happened in this country.
Are you optimistic? That's quite a bleak picture you're painting there. The idea that the excellence that we celebrate in sport by people of color is actually not really insight into a country that's getting less racist.
Depends on the day. It depends on the day. I do think the one ability that sports has that it hasn't lost is it's one of the few activities we all do together. People don't worship together. They don't do a whole lot of other things together, but people watch sports together. And a World Cup or an Olympics, those are especially amazing events because you have people from different countries, rooting for each other. But you have us all communal. It's a sense of community there. And I don't care, it could be Snicker eating in this country. If Americans are about to meddle in it, we all coming together to watch it. And so from that standpoint, I think its ability to bring people together is just more powerful than ever. However, the part where I sometimes get a little dismayed by is our ability to compartmentalize, as I was just talking about, to not connect the black person that you see, make a jump shot and who's the leading scorer in the NBA with the black person that you see every day. And so, yeah, I mean, like the reality is that this racial conversation we've been trying to have in this country for hundreds of years is very much in a holding pattern. It always has been. I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that, people of color, we've taken this about as far as we can take it. We talk about race all the time. It's not new to us. We're here for that conversation. Is everybody else has got to be willing to join it and to, for that matter, not let the fight just be a problem we have to solve. I always thought the most unfortunate part about racism, sexism, really homophobia, really any of those, is that the people most burdened by it are the ones who are charged with solving it. And that's not fair. And especially since we're not the ones that benefit from it, right? And unfortunately, racism is far too comfortable and too profitable. And so we can't get everybody to agree not only if it exists, but where it exists and how it exists, because that would mean you having to admit that you were complicit in it existing.
Jemele, thank you. I'm going to open up for questions.
This will be scary.
Raise your hands. We've got a microphone over here. Rich, do you want to come a little bit further forward? Excellent. There's a guy here with a yellow T-shirt on his head.
I see him.
Oh, I see him. Yeah, I think so.
Thank you so much.
How you doing?
Thank you. Hi, Jemele.
Hey.
My question is directed to the NBA and basically players such as LeBron, Chris Paul, and Dwayne Wade, how they're very active in their community. But still, some people suggest that if they really want to make change, they should sit down and force change that way by not playing, and then the agenda will be pushed along. What do you have to say about that?
Well, I think those guys probably don't feel the need to do that. A lot of that has to do with the tone of the NBA. They have a commissioner in Adam Silver who welcomes their community involvement, who welcomes them speaking out and being engaged in the political process. So I don't think they feel as if they would need to punish the NBA for something that they actually welcome and encourage them to do. LeBron has used his voice and his money to, I think, change I think to change the mentality of today's athletes. I always think that other athletes follow whoever is the athlete or athletes of that generation. When Michael Jordan was the most popular athlete in the world, athletes looked at his blueprint and copied it, which is how to become an international commercial success, and how to brand themselves and market themselves, stay apolitical, be community engaged and quiet, right? Today, the two probably most influential athletes in our society are Colin Kaepernick and LeBron James. And because of that, I think it's by no coincidence you see an enormous awakening among athletes across all sports who now feel obligated and feel determined to use their voice and their platform for something bigger than themselves.
Next question, please. Can we see, is Yuko around with her microphone? Okay, if we go over here, that'd be great. The entire audience is behind you. Ah, brilliant. Thank you so much.
Another mic.
Thanks, Yuko.
So I grew up with like Boomer, Dan, and Scott Van Pelt, and looking at sports that exist right now where of the 5 sports, a majority of them are over 50% people of color. Watching a show like The Six, when you and Michael Smith were a part of it, was something refreshing. So almost like 2-part question. Like, one, did you guys recognize like the socially conscious thing that you were doing at that moment in time with stuff like even as something as simple as today was a good day? And two, with people at ESPN like Nagandi, like Sage, and one of my favorites like Bohami Jones, like, are they going to try to return back to something like that since they kind of moved away from it?
Well, I think, and thank you for your question. I appreciate that. You know, when Mike and I, when we took the 6 p.m. anchor roles, we did it with the intent of bringing the things we did on His and Hers over to the 6 o'clock Sports Center. Some of it really hit. The Different World intro that we did, for example, Good Day, as you mentioned. Some of it hit, some of it missed, because that's a much different audience than we were accustomed to at noon. People at 6 o'clock at Sports Center, regardless of the fact that there are no new highlights to show you and you're looking forward to the evening, that they want to come home and see highlights, even though it's nothing to show, really. And so even though we tried to sort of overcome where that audience was, and certainly, you know, we didn't, I've often said this to people who've asked this, like, we didn't go out of our way to be black. We just black. I mean, that's just how it is, right? So we weren't going out of our way to do anything. It was like, this is how we are, whether the camera is on or off, and this is what we're bringing to the audience. And so I think, you know, ESPN understands the importance of culture, period, across all cultures, and the fact that, you know, music, entertainment is so linked to sports. It's just a matter of further figuring out where's the best place for that. I love what Bomani and Pablo are doing with High Noon. I think that's a great show. It's perfect for them. And, you know, Lebitard, another guy who I think seamlessly merges that. But you have to know also what's effective for the audience at what time and why. And 6 p.m. is a much different dynamic for those kinds of things. Because the traditional Sports Center viewer, when you hear Sports Center, they want Sports Center. So, you know, it was a bit of a awkward fit, I think, for us. And, you know, one thing that we always said, that if we can't do it in a way that we can feel proud of, do it our way, it's nothing for us to leave it behind. So we left it behind.
More questions. Here, right at the front. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you for taking my question. My question to you, Ms. Hill, is regarding the programming on ESPN. I am not so much a sports fan. I'm more into Outside the Lines and E60, and I've noticed, you know, there aren't a lot of women of color on those shows. What inroads do you see happening there, if at all? Thank you.
Yeah, there are definitely inroads there. And, of course, I understand it's a difference between the front-facing talent that host the show versus the ones that do the stories, because we have a cross-section of reporters that do stories for E60 and for Outside the Lines. But, you know, I mean, rightfully so, has been Bob Lee's show for years. I mean, he's one of the most respected journalists that we have, him and Jeremy Schaap. Incredible, amazing journalists. But I've done pieces for both. And one thing about that show group is they make it known they are open to great stories from anybody. And so sometimes in television, it's just a matter of, you know, if a really great person hosts a show for 20 years, there's no reason for them not to be there, you know. So you can't just move them off, you know, necessarily. But I do think with the types of stories, the types of journalism, you know, that's where their real diversity is. It's not, I mean, that's certainly no disrespect to Bob Lee, who I love tremendously, but the type of journalism they do on E60 and Outside the Lines is very unique, and it's a reason why they win Emmy after Emmy after Emmy. So I would certainly back and stand up for their content as being as diverse as any on any network, be it in sports or outside of it.
But Jemele, that's an interesting point, that to create diversity, you have to maybe move people to the side who are not serving that. Do you think it's incumbent upon some veterans to let the younger, more diverse come up?
Look, if it was me, y'all not putting me out of my job. That's just how it is. Unless I give you a reason to, you know what I'm saying? But no, and look, don't get it twisted. I'm not just saying this because I work there. But when it comes to, you know, our front-facing talent, like ESPN is pretty much the leader in this area with, you know, myself, Carrie Champion, Bomani, Pablo. Like, these are people on other networks who don't get shows, and they have them on ESPN. And so I think we do, Mina Kimes, we do very well in this area. Are there some areas that we can improve on? Of course. As I mentioned, I think behind the camera is probably where, you know, I think we would say is an area where we need to address. But in terms of the number of women, people of color that we have on our air, I mean, I'll take the Pepsi Challenge against anybody with that.
More questions. There's a chap here in a black T-shirt. Rich, could you go right back? Brilliant. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for taking my question. Jemele, you're a rock star. I've followed you for a long time on Twitter. Love you on Mike and Mike. My question is, and I forget the gentleman's name, but the young pitcher in the All-Star game that it came out that he had made.
Josh Hader.
Yes.
Yep.
You're much closer to the professional sporting world than I'll ever be. How does a team move on from that? How does a sport move on from that? I mean, do we learn from that? Is he ostracized from the league? What's the next step?
So here's what was interesting, and for those not familiar with the story, Josh Hader is a pitcher. He's a pitcher for the Milwaukee Brewers. And it turned out that when he was maybe 17 years old, he tweeted some racist, homophobic things. And those tweets were unearthed. I don't know if he had tried to scrub them or just people just went back far enough in his feed to be able to find him. But they were disturbing, to say the least. So this all comes out. You know, his teammates stood behind him saying he was a changed person. That was when he's 17. I believe he's like 23 or 24 right now. And the odd thing for me was, and I don't know how many people are aware of this, but at the ballpark last night, he came out and pitched and got a standing ovation. For what? I mean, that's what I was trying to figure out. So you give him a standing ovation because he said something racist and apologized? I mean, you don't get a cookie for that. You know what I'm saying? And so, you know, it's obviously put his teammates and Major League Baseball in an awkward position because you look around, you see they're having diversity issues as a result to specifically African American players. It's a black league when you look at the number of Latino and Hispanic players in the league, for sure. But, you know, they have some issues attracting African-American fans and African-American athletes. And for me, the disappointing part is that standing ovation, which I thought was utterly disrespectful, because, again, I don't know what you're applauding for exactly. And I'm not saying that he should be banished to Siberia, because it is definitely true that a lot of people, when you were young, you said a lot of regretful, stupid things. So it should be a teachable moment in there. But that teachable moment can't be that because he said he was sorry for it, that he somehow deserves to be positioned as some kind of hero because he said sorry for something that he should have been sorry for, and it wasn't like he told on himself. Somebody else found those tweets. And had they not found them, I doubt very seriously if Josh Hader would have come to the microphone and said, you know what, when I was 17, I said white power. Probably not, you know? So yeah, it just kind of exposes some problematic layers about how we think about race, how we discuss bigotry, and more important, it's interesting how when an athlete looks to a certain way, there is a rush to redeem and forgive. That train is never late.
Jemele, thank you so much. I wish you good luck with your book, with your new career, and with President Rock. Thank you very much. You've been fantastic. Thank you so much for listening to Jemele Hill. Aussie, you've been a fantastic crowd despite the rain. Enjoy the rest of the afternoon. Keep looking at Aussie.com and hashtag AussieFest 2018. Thank you so much.